a trial that is for the death of one person, the murder of one person, Durst's best friend, Susan Berman, but it also involves the death murder of Morris Black in Galveston, as well as the disappearance of his wife, Kathy Durst. And yet, you hear everyone in there laughing, and I'm assuming, never assume, but I'm going to assume that that was also the laughter of some of the jury members, because when I watched this, I was incredulous. What was your response to it?
Ashley, imagine being the family of Morris Black, having to go through this ordeal, not just once, but a second time, where you have the defense attorneys, you have even the judge and some of the jurors laughing about Bob Durst killing your family member and arguing self-defense. So having to relive this a second time must be very, very difficult for them. And I understand why the defense wants to do it. They want to inject that levity into the courtroom. And generally speaking, when folks are laughing, that tends to be a good sign for the defense and not the prosecution, especially when you're dealing with a very serious murder case here involving not one, but three people.
Well, that's a good point, that it's probably a good thing for the defense. Here's what I also wonder, and maybe you can help me out. I know that you are there in California, not far away from where this trial is occurring. Every state has some variations on rules of evidence. How is it, because they also had a reenactment video that had been done using little graphics of how it occurred. How is it that they were allowed evidence-wise, and I'm assuming Durst physically probably could not do the demonstration, to allow the two attorneys to do it? Because it just feels like there's some opportunity for appeal in that, but I could be completely wrong.
Well, there's no question, and this is Judge Wyndham. He has given the attorneys broad latitude. When you watch that video reenactment, actually the cartoon, it's fascinating because Bob Durst looks like he's been working out and his arms look huge. And not only did they show the video to these jurors, Ashley, the court allowed Dick DeGuerin and the defense team to actually narrate it. So the attorneys were testifying and leading their own client through this reenactment. So it's really bizarre, not something that you typically see. And again, although judges can allow different pieces of evidence to help the jurors when it comes to demonstratives, this was something that was highly unusual, in my opinion, and something that it would not be admitted in other courtrooms in other states.
I have never seen, and I hate to say I've been doing this for a long time, but I've been doing it for a long time, and I have never seen two attorneys act out any scenario or as a demonstration. So I would agree with you. To your point, this is very unusual. For you, either as the former prosecutor or if you were thinking as a defense attorney?
I thought Lewin did score some points, and let's not forget, we've seen and heard a lot of testimony about Durst being jealous of his wife, being abusive, both physically and verbally, even kicking one of Kathy's friends in the face. And we heard the testimony about Kathy being upset that he didn't sue Bob Durst and Durst was able to settle with him. So I think this is all very good testimony for Lewin and the prosecution, because ultimately they want to paint a picture of Bob Durst, this older picture of an abusive, strong individual who's capable of murder, not the Bob Durst that the jurors are currently seeing, frail in his upper 70s, who can barely even stand and is sitting in a wheelchair. So Lewin really needs to go back and put this image, the one that the viewers are seeing right now, in the minds of the jurors. The old Bob Durst, the violent one, not the frail old man that they're seeing right now.
And I think that he's also done a lot of questioning to say in discrediting Durst. Durst, you lied. He testifies, listen, no honors pass fail, versus the reality there were honors. So, you know, this prosecutor has gone meticulously and very well organized through many different things that he has caught Durst saying, I'm wrong or I lied. Do you think that's an effective strategy to go through every single lie that he's going to catch him in?
Very effective, because we know that this case will come down to Bob Durst's credibility, just like the Morris Black case. Those jurors in Texas, they believe Bob Durst when they acquitted him, and they believe that he acted in self-defense when he shot and killed Morris Black and disposed of his body. And in this particular case, with the criminal defense team, and this is criminal defense 101, they want to put the victim on trial, say Kathy is unstable, she's a drug user. That's why we're talking about Kathy Durst's grades from the early 80s. So this is an effective strategy by the defense. And on the other side, the prosecution really wants to show that Bob Durst is a murderer. And that's why earlier this week on Tuesday, those key admissions that Lewin was able to get out of Durst may be enough to get that guilty conviction, because Durst admitted to lying again and again and said that had he killed Susan Berman, he would lie to this very jury.
And, you know, Neama, next week we have more cross-examination of Durst. I can't even imagine what more we're going to hear, but certainly we're going to be covering it here live on Court TV. One of the things that she said was, loss is not something that a trial will fix. And then she said some other things moving on and about moving forward, but I think truer words were never spoken. Neama, what are your thoughts as you listen to what she had to say?
Ashley, you and I, we always talk about the victims, and really, it's so heartbreaking in a case like this, 4 innocent people murdered. And, whether it's a civil or criminal case, it never brings that loved one back. We know that. But, they do get that sense of justice. I expect Chad Isaak to spend the rest of his life in prison. And, a lot of questions were unanswered as to why he would do this. There was no clear motive. That was one of the big issues in the case that the defense pointed to. But regardless of whether there was a motive or not, these are 3 people that were killed in such a horrific manner, multiple gunshots, over 100 stab wounds combined. So they must have suffered tremendously. And to have to see this individual, deny responsibility and point the fingers at others, talking about alleged affair, tenants, an ex that was in prison, really point the finger at law enforcement as well, and everyone but himself when he was responsible, and all the evidence that was found in his house must have been very, very difficult for the family, but hopefully they can get some closure after this guilty verdict this afternoon, which, by the way, Ashley, I predicted yesterday, if you recall, when I was on.
Yes, absolutely. We both talked about, and I also predicted it would be in before lunch, and it was. I think this jury did their job, certainly, and everybody wants to know why. And unfortunately, while a conviction brings a sort of closure, although it cannot make it better for the victims' families, it also means I think they're going to wake up every night and say, but why? But why? I know I would. So I agree with you, and we're likely never going to know. Neama, what other thoughts did you have, if any, as you were, again, watching that surveillance video?
Ashley, first, I got to give credit to Chanley and the folks at Court TV that have been in North Dakota for weeks. Got to give credit to them. They're giving us the insight to the jurors. We can't see that as we're watching from the comfort of our homes and offices. But, I thought the surveillance was very powerful. And ultimately, the defense was really put in a position where either Chad Isaak is the unluckiest person in the world, right? Caught on surveillance, there's blood and fibers in his vehicle and his home. You have shell casings, the exact number of rounds that were shot. You have the footprint. You have the exact same hoodie, the mask, gun parts that match the gun, or the evidence was planted. So really, to kind of point the finger at the boogeyman and everyone else that the defense tried to do, although it was somewhat effective, ultimately it was not enough to really overcome this avalanche of evidence, including the surveillance. So I think that's why after the jury sifted through the hundreds and hundreds of exhibits and videos yesterday and this morning, they were able to come to a verdict relatively quickly.
Prosecutor Susan Williams. All right, we're going to focus the rest of this hour on trial advocacy. And here's what I'd love to hear from each of you. And let me start, Neama, if I could, with you. If after watching that and watching the trial, you had to say, here's one thing I want viewers to know about trial advocacy, whether it's good or bad, what would it be?
I would say that the defense overplayed their hand, in particular when they put on Chad Isaak's patients who came and they testified that Isaak called them on the Saturday before the Monday murders, which were on April 1st, to cancel their appointments because they had a dentist appointment. They were trying to set up an alibi or an excuse for Chad Isaak, and that opened the door for the prosecution to bring the dental office manager in to say that Chad Isaak did not have an appointment that day. I think that really hurt the defense, and it ended the case really poorly for them. That was sort of the last piece of evidence that the jury had when they went into that deliberation room.
What's the one thing that you would say or description you would give for what it was like to prepare for a case of magnitude as a prosecutor?
No question. This is probably one of the most violent acts in North Dakota history. So this is a tremendous challenge. This isn't Los Angeles, where unfortunately, these types of murder cases are all too common. This is a small town in North Carolina. And it kind of goes back to some of the things Susan was saying earlier, that you really got to kind of know your audience here. And, we heard about the McDonald's employee who was testifying that it was 40 degrees and that was hot. And that's certainly not hot here in California, but that's why she was surprised that someone was wearing a ski mask. Well, if you're going to come after law enforcement very aggressively in a small town like this that likely know their local law enforcement officers, respect them, that may be something that really turns off the jury. I know you want to be aggressive as a defense attorney, but you got to know your jurisdiction, you got to know your audience. And when you're dealing with a case like this, it's easy for us to armchair quarterback here on Court TV, but I really like what they did when they focused on, the ex that was released from prison, or the affair. Pointing the fingers at others, I think that made sense. But things like the dentist defense and attacking law enforcement, saying they're rookies, saying that they were unprepared for a case of this magnitude, I don't think that was particularly effective as a defense.
Tell me a little bit more deep dive on how or where you feel that defense really overplayed their hand, as you mentioned earlier.
Actually, they should have stopped with the DMV witness, the 3,000 white Ford F-150s, one of them being one of the other suspects in the case, Kessel. So that's where they should have stopped and not moved on to the dentist defense. I think probably wouldn't have changed the outcome, but would have been a stronger case than the one that they presented. Sometimes less is more.
And while I have you, because we do have about 30 more seconds, and I know you're going to be leaving us, Neama, did you see anything throughout the course of the trial that you watched that screamed blaring error, and uh-oh, we're going to have an appeal?
No, and actually, the only reason this case went to trial is because the defense desperately tried to get the evidence suppressed. They took issues with the probable cause statements in those search warrants of the vehicle and the home, so they wanted to preserve that for appeal. So that's the only reason this case went to trial.
All right. Neama Rahmani, former federal prosecutor, thank you so much for being with us today. Greatly appreciate it and love your insight. Susan